There are places people abandon because they are dangerous, and then there are places people abandon because they are afraid of what might still be there. In a small rural village surrounded by dry fields and old stone houses, there was a well that nobody used anymore. The villagers called it the Black Well. It was more than 100 years old. No one knew exactly who had built it, but everyone knew one rule: never look into the well after midnight. People who broke that rule were said to hear someone calling their name from the darkness below. Most people considered it an old village superstition, until a young man named Daniel came back home. Daniel had grown up in the village but had moved to the city years earlier. He worked as a freelance photographer and had recently started documenting abandoned places and forgotten buildings. When he returned, he heard the stories about the well. His uncle laughed when Daniel asked about it. "Don't waste your time with that nonsense. What happened there?" Daniel asked. His uncle stopped smiling. "My brother disappeared there." Daniel knew his uncle had an older brother, but he had never heard the story. "What do you mean disappeared?" His uncle looked toward the window. "It happened in 1987. He went to the well late at night. We found his shoes beside it the next morning." "Did he fall in?" "No." "Then where did he go?" His uncle whispered, "That's what nobody knows." Daniel assumed the story had been exaggerated over the years. The next evening, he decided to photograph the well. He reached it just before sunset. The well stood behind an abandoned farmhouse, surrounded by tall weeds and twisted trees. The stone walls were black with age. There was an old iron cover over the opening. Daniel lifted it. The smell that came from inside was strange. Not the smell of dirty water. It smelled like wet earth and something much older. He switched on his flashlight and looked down. The beam disappeared into darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. Daniel took several photographs. Then he heard something, a faint sound, like someone whispering. He froze. He turned around. Nobody was there. He looked back into the well. The whisper came again. This time he clearly heard his name, Daniel. He immediately stepped away. His heart was pounding. He told himself it was the wind, but there was no wind. He closed the iron cover and left. That night, Daniel reviewed the photographs on his camera. Most were normal, until he reached the last picture. It showed the inside of the well, but something was wrong. At the bottom of the photograph was a pale face, a woman's face. Daniel zoomed in. The face appeared to be looking directly at the camera. He deleted the photograph. Then his camera turned itself on. The photograph appeared again. Daniel stared at the screen. The woman was closer, much closer. Her eyes were completely black. Daniel dropped the camera. At exactly 12:03 a.m., someone knocked on his bedroom window. 3 slow knocks. Knock. Silence. Knock. Silence. Knock. Daniel didn't move. His room was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no tree close enough to reach the window. He slowly approached the glass. Outside was darkness. Then he saw something standing at the edge of the garden. A woman. Her clothes were soaked. Her long hair covered most of her face. Daniel blinked. She was gone. The next morning, he told his uncle everything. His uncle became pale. "You heard your name?" Daniel nodded. His uncle sat down. "Then you shouldn't have gone there." "Why?" "Because the well doesn't call everyone." Daniel stared at him. "What does that mean?" His uncle lowered his voice. "According to the old people, a woman named Miriam lived here almost a century ago. Her husband disappeared. People blamed her for his death. What happened to her? They tied a rope around her and threw her into that well." Daniel felt a chill. "She was alive?" His uncle nodded. "That's what the story says." "Did they ever find her body?" "No." Daniel suddenly remembered the photograph, the face, the black eyes. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. At 12:03 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. There was silence. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Why did you leave me?" Daniel immediately hung up. The phone rang again. He switched it off. It rang anyway. This time, the voice said, "Come back to the well." Daniel refused, but the following morning, he discovered muddy footprints inside his house. They began at the front door. They crossed the hallway. They stopped beside his bed. And beside the final footprint was a small puddle of black water. Daniel knew then that whatever was at the well had followed him. He decided to leave the village. He packed his bags and drove toward the main road. But after 20 minutes, he realized he was driving in circles. The same abandoned farmhouse appeared again, then again, and again. Finally, his car stopped. The engine died. Daniel looked ahead. The well was standing beside the road. He had never seen it there before. The iron cover was open. From inside came the sound of crying. A woman's crying. Daniel grabbed his camera and stepped out. He didn't want to go near it, but then he heard another voice. His uncle's voice. Daniel. Daniel turned around. His uncle was standing behind him, but something was wrong. His face was pale. His eyes were completely black. Daniel stepped backward. The figure smiled. Then its jaw opened far wider than a human mouth should. Daniel ran. He ran toward the well without realizing it. The ground beneath him suddenly collapsed. He fell. His hands caught the edge of the well. Below him was complete darkness. Then hundreds of whispers filled the air. Names. Dozens of names. People who had disappeared over the years. And among them, his own name. Daniel looked down. A pale hand slowly emerged from the darkness. It grabbed his wrist. He screamed. And then everything went black. The next morning, villagers found Daniel's camera beside the well. There was no sign of him. The police searched the area. They found nothing. No body. No blood. No footprints. Nothing. The official explanation was that Daniel had probably left the village voluntarily, but his uncle never believed it. Years later, the old well was finally sealed with concrete. The villagers thought the nightmare was over, but according to people who live nearby, strange things still happen there. Sometimes late at night, people hear knocking beneath the ground. 3 knocks. Always 3. And some villagers claim that if you stand near the sealed well after midnight, you can hear a man's voice whispering from underneath. A voice that says, "Don't look down." And then another voice whispers from even deeper below. A woman's voice, calling a name. Daniel.